We've been weak in integrating the private sector, which owns most of the infrastructure in the United States of all types. We've been very poor in integrating the private sector into disaster planning that government does. The reason for producing a list like this is that I think that it's important, and I'm sure you do this, to analyze carefully not just what the problems are, but what the obstacles are. It is very easy to assemble a list of things that ought to be done and then feel like you've actually taken action by making the list. Instead, some of these things are really tough. They're politically tough, they're organizationally tough, they're managerially tough, they're tough in a whole bunch of ways. And that means that, first of all, having a good understanding of why they're difficult is really crucial. And second of all, organizing and mobilizing to do something about those barriers is really important. So I think that it is not sufficient just to make a list of the problems that you face. Certainly not sufficient to make a list and assume that it's done. But along with the list of problems is to hard-headedly and perceptively assess why those problems exist and begin to work methodically at removing the obstacles, securing agreement of partners, etc., in order to improve. Well, I've gone on much longer than I probably should have. In fact, I'm able to go on for an entire week, or probably longer than a week, because we have a management training course that lasts that long. We don't talk all that time. We have a lot of opportunity for our participants to participate. We would be happy, as Tony said and as Fritz said, to work with you and help to develop training that either we could help deliver or that you could deliver to your people. We are very interested in learning more about Indonesia, and with the help of the Rajawali Foundation, contributing in a small way to the extremely important efforts that you're making here in this area. I hope that this at least gives you a little bit of indication of whether this might be useful, and we would be very happy for feedback and criticism on these specific issues or to talk about the subject more broadly. I am very grateful for your attention and your keen interest in the issue, and I am extremely grateful for the hospitality I've been shown over the last couple of days here in Indonesia, and I look forward to spending a lot of time here in the future. So thank you very much.
Excuse me, Professor Howard. There's one last question, sure. I think. For recovery of disaster, when it's happened, I mean, when the implementation of recovery is conducted, when Katrina happens, I mean, should we wait for next year budget or current budget, and how you solve the problem?
A good question. There both are emergency accounts that can be tapped, and sometimes the president at the federal level, sometimes the president on his authority will commit money and get permission to spend it later, basically spend it first and get permission later, with the idea that there will be political support for spending money to save lives or to begin recovery. The longer-term issues of recovery and the immense expenses that are involved in helping a city like New Orleans or the rest of the Gulf region recover are handled through either the regular budget process on an annual basis or sometimes on a special emergency bill. But there, the spending has to be authorized by Congress before it can be spent. I think that story is roughly similar for individual states, but their laws vary, and frankly, I don't know exactly what the rules would be from state to state. It's very close to the
So I thought that one of the things that I think was important for this is where Arne made the distinction between recovery and what he called advanced recovery. And in there, one of the categories, although he didn't have time to go into it, was what he talked about as essentially endowment or investment funds. So actually Jason was just saying to me that there's now a multi-donor trust fund being set up in Indonesia, which in a sense is trying to anticipate those financial crises by having the fund in advance. What Arne was talking about was for some of the cities in America, what they're now doing is that they're holding investment funds, and so they're getting the interest on those funds, and they're basically kept in that emergency account so they can be, instead, because as Arne said, the rating of the city is going to drop, so people aren't going to lend it money. So it's anticipating that by investing the funds and building up the capital to have available once the recovery starts. Now, I know in Indonesia, obviously a lot of local governments are very worried about the KPK and whether then if they're spending money, they might be accused for corruption. But I think that's the other thing that Arne said was very important with advanced recovery. You can have a negotiation with the public and with different levels of government about what is acceptable at a time of crisis. So it's not that the crisis has happened and then you have to start making regulations about how to distribute the money, who can distribute the money, but that's actually been agreed by everybody within the community, whether it's a province, whether it's the district, in advance. And so that might not completely remove the problem, but it should reduce the problem, because it's not then the officials just suddenly, with no prior guidance, distributing the funds, because those regulations have already come under what Arne calls advanced recovery. So you're sort of predicting forward.
Okay, I think another interesting question, excuse me. If disaster happens in Indonesia, many private sectors invite, for example, commercial television invites for donation from community to collect the money. Is that possible in your country? What about the public accountability for that act?
No, I mean, I think it's not. I think it's not only public donations. I think it's also international donations. What you often get is the situation, and actually, Arne was telling me a very interesting case that the U.S. had never really expected it would need international support. So when Katrina happened, people overseas started donating money. But the U.S. had no way...
Sending things in boats.
Sending materials in boats. And it had never thought about it, so it had no system for dispersing it. But so I think it applies both to the raising of domestic funds and to international funds. And, I think, but Arne knows in more detail, in most environments, a lot of the funds don't get used optimally. Right. Because they tend to come in a rush. And often, that initial point, governments sometimes have enough funds to deal with that. It's often the long-term recovery issues that then get ignored. And then, but of course, both the public and international donors want to see an immediate return for that investment, in the first few weeks. So I think, some of these ideas, if you know certain regions are vulnerable, then you could have a structure of a trust fund, either, setting up money in advance or being available for those donations to go in from the public into those specially designated funds where, there will be more accountability and more oversight. I think if you combine that with what Arne was talking about earlier, that you have in advance a set of regulations, who can disperse that money, how much money, under what circumstances, you can already have that discussion with civil society and with the media and with religious groups and have them sign off on it. So as you don't get the immediate politics coming in of, you're just spending this on your people, and, the same in every country.